So I will say welcome to today's Spotlight Talk. Thank you for joining us for this lunchtime chat. We're going to stay on mute during the talk. If you have any questions that come to mind, you can throw them in the chat and I can either try to answer them or we can save them for Holly at the end. And then we will have time for a Q&A at the end where you can unmute and have a little chat about what we're about to learn. And in the interest of making the most of time, I'll hand it over to you, Holly.
All right, thanks, Larissa. Welcome, everyone. My name is Holly Gore. I am the Director of Interpretation here at the Wharton Esherick Museum, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to our Spotlight Talk. Today's collection highlight is going to be a trove of archival materials that the museum received in 2020. We've been talking about them a bit lately because they are pretty exciting. So I'm going to dive right in by sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so the A to Z of Wharton Esherick and studio furniture. The Wharton Esherick Museum very recently received a trove of archives in 2020 that were held back by the Esherick family. And one very large portion of this were Wharton Esherick's business records from the 1950s and 60s, which is really exciting find because this is a period where Wharton Esherick's career intersected with the American studio furniture movement, with studio furniture being the modern practice of creating one-of-a-kind or limited-run furniture objects in a small workshop, either by a single designer craftsperson or under their close supervision. And so this is something that really takes a lot of momentum after World War II, with Wharton Esherick being this kind of acknowledged kind of early ancestor to this movement. So Wharton Esherick had a long and varied career that began well before there was anything that we ever called studio furniture. So I'm showing this staircase here of the Bach House in Gulf Mills, Pennsylvania. This is from the 1930s. And this is a period where Wharton Esherick's career really takes off, where he goes through these kind of local networks to finding patrons who are interested in really kind of very sculptural and daring kinds of furniture. And in the case of the Bachs, these were people he met through the Philadelphia Symphony, with them being the major patrons there and him being a regular attendee. And then next to that, I've got the music stand, which is really another era of Wharton Esherick's production. It's a piece that's designed for mobility. And of course, with the rise of the studio furniture movement comes about new opportunities for displaying and selling work in galleries and reaching people that possibly the artist never even met. And so the music stand, with its portability and lower price point than a staircase like the Bach staircase, was something really designed to travel in those kinds of environments. So digging into the archives and starting with the American Craftsmen's Council. So we've got this lovely letterhead with this beautiful kind of modernist type with the ACC, and right below there on the list it says Mrs. Vanderbilt Webb, the president. And Aileen Osborne Webb was a major patron, a kind of founding patron of the studio craft movement in the United States. She was a foremost supporter, putting her organizational skills and her money behind the promotion of contemporary crafts. So just a few of the things that she did in 1940. She established the predecessor to today's American Craft Council, which was called the Handicraft Cooperative League of America. And then here on this letterhead, it was the American Craftsmen's Council before it became the Craft Council that exists today. She also founded the America House Gallery in Manhattan, which was a retail outlet for contemporary craft in a very prominent location right next to the Museum of Modern Art. And then in 1941, she establishes the Craft Horizons magazine. She also founded the School for American Craftsmen called SAC, which was a training program for craft artists, and it grew in the wake of World War II as returning GIs came back with their GI Bill funds, and that's how we start getting these new generations of art school trained craftspeople in the United States. And then in 1956, Aileen Osborne Webb founds the Museum for Contemporary Crafts. And that's the moment where Wharton Esherick's involvement with the American Craft Council is really going to heat up. So here, Wharton Esherick's solo exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Crafts. So almost as soon as this museum opens, the director, Tom Tibbs, starts talking with Wharton Esherick about borrowing objects from him for use in group shows. And then very quickly, that conversation turns to the solo exhibition, which was ultimately called The Furniture and Sculpture of Wharton Esherick. And this is a moment of late career recognition for Wharton Esherick. He was 70 years old at the time. And in the photo, we're seeing in the foreground a piece called Darling. It looks like a deer that's just been maybe startled. And then behind that, Wharton Esherick's iconic 1930s staircase that was taken out of his studio and reassembled here. So of course, the exhibition was an amazing kind of exposure for him, but it also meant that during the time when they were organizing the exhibition, there were further opportunities to interact with the Craft Council, since a lot of their programming was integrated. For one, he was invited to be a juror for the annual exhibition called Young Americans. It was for craftspeople under 30. And also he was invited to attend the first annual Conference of American Craftsmen at Asilomar on a California Central Coast. So here we see him lounging outside with one of the panels in wood. The notes on this, or the kind of the documentation on this, said that they did some of the discussions outdoors just because the weather was so beautiful. And that's Wharton Esherick is the man who's facing the camera. He's got kind of a pinstripe jacket on and dark clothes. He's kind of got his elbow resting on his knee. And, again, he is kind of this elder statesperson of this group. These are, for the most part, people who are at least a generation younger than him here, who are really starting out their careers. And he's someone who's been going on for quite a while. So the Craft Council actually flew him out in the capacity of an advisor. So no one was really very clear on what the duties were of this advisor, least of all Wharton Esherick, who was very open about that. And from the transcripts of these panel discussions, it looks that he really didn't contribute very much to the organized presentations, but when it was a more kind of casual group conversations, and that's where he really shone and really had a lot of opportunity to interact with these younger craftspeople who were very interested in learning about him and his work. So one of these people was Wendell Castle. Wendell Castle, Wendell Castle was part of this generation, though he did not meet Esherick at the Craft Council. But Wendell Castle actually read about Wharton Esherick in a book. It was a book called Shaping America's Products, and he was absolutely enthralled with Wharton Esherick. And there's a story that circulated quite a bit. Wendell Castle has told it, people around the museum have told it. It's kind of a misconnection story where a very young Wendell Castle hops in a car with a couple of his friends, and they drive out to Wharton Esherick's studio. And they have no appointment because, being kind of young, they didn't have any sense of that's something you should do. So they showed up, and Wharton Esherick very bluntly told them that he was busy and that they should go away. So later on, we see him trying to reconnect here. This is back to our archives. Wendell Castle is writing to Wharton Esherick later in his life on some stationery from the Rochester Institute of Technology, which is home to the School for American Craftsmen. Again, that Craft Council connection. And this is 1963. So he writes, "Dear Mr. Esherick," so being very polite. "We are planning a field trip for our students in furniture design and woodworking, and we would like to have the opportunity of visiting your studio." And he goes on to say what a wonderful thing this would be for the students, and that there'd be about 20 people. Wharton Esherick wrote a little note on the bottom. If you can see on the very lower edge of the page, it says, "Did not come or call." There's a little bit more to that story, which was that Wharton Esherick had replied, "Yes, you may come, but I charge for my time." I think it was something like $25 he wanted. And Wendell Castle was a little bit miffed by that. So that particular meeting never happened. But Wendell Castle did eventually get to the Wharton Esherick studio, and this photo of the two of them out on the deck was taken around 1966, so very near the end of Wharton Esherick's life. They did actually make that connection. So Wharton Esherick had a much warmer relationship with Sam Maloof, who he did meet at the ACC Asilomar conference in California. So here's a happy birthday, Wharton, from 1966. And this is from Sam Maloof, who's reminiscing. He says, "Reading the Craft Horizons this evening renewed my delightful day with you in March." And so what he's referring to is that he had come out to interview Wharton Esherick for an article in Craft Horizons, that ACC publication, and had come to visit, and they had all, a great time was had by all. So just a little bit on Sam Maloof to show some of his work and the kind of connection it had with Wharton Esherick. These are some images I got from the Library of Congress, photos of Sam Maloof's house, his own handmade house. And there's a lot to look at in here, but I'll just point out some of the furniture pieces. So there's a dining set in the foreground. Behind that, there is a spiral staircase. And then in the lower right-hand corner, there's a music stand. It looks like it's got 4 sides, so you could fit a quartet around that music stand. And here's another view, a bedroom in the Maloof house, and you can see kind of right in the next to the bed, there's one of Sam Maloof's most iconic works. That rocking chair is what he's really probably best known for. And then here are Sam Maloof and Wharton Esherick in the Wharton Esherick studio. Again, this is from that 1966 trip where Sam Maloof was doing the interview for the Craft Horizons. And going back in time, here's a carbon copy of a letter that Wharton Esherick wrote to Sam Maloof in 1958. And Sam Maloof had evidently written him a letter saying that he would like Wharton Esherick to contribute to an exhibition going on in California at Scripps College. But it's the second paragraph here that I'm interested in, where he says, "I sure do remember you at Asilomar. In fact, I think that your ideas about what we craftsmen are trying to do were the best of any that I got from the conference. Good luck to you and all more power to you. I think you are on the right track. I would like to have seen some of your things. Is there a place here in the East where I can see them, or have you photographs? I will return them to you." So something very warm. Clearly, this is someone he likes a lot, but also very explicit in talking about what happened at Asilomar. So kind of go back to the Asilomar conference. I mean, one of the really fantastic things that the Craft Council has done at this point is to digitize all of their archives. And so I can actually, it's very easy to go on their website and read the transcripts of these panels that Wharton Esherick and Sam Maloof both participated in. And one really big part of what they were talking about was collaboration with industry and doing this, it's a technological age. And in this technological age, how do we keep craft relevant? And so here's Wharton Esherick's program, and I'll just read a little bit of the theme for June 12. It was the socioeconomic outlook. So discussion will revolve around the evolution of all aspects of craftsmanship in our technological age, its relation to art, to the needs of men, to philosophy, to industry, so that the end of basic understanding of the present status of the craftsman in our society may be achieved. Like, pretty weighty stuff here. And I think maybe some pretty dated language. I think most of us don't talk about, craft as having one trajectory, or the craftsman, or the needs of men. But nevertheless, that was the direction. And if you look in the transcripts, there is actually quite a bit of conversation around the direction needing to be collaboration with industry, that craftspeople needed to stay relevant by collaborating with industry and working as kind of almost design researchers. There was also a lot of interested in Scandinavian craft, and it not only in the way Scandinavian furniture looked, but in the way that the Scandinavian education system would train students in the context of industry, so that people would come up working in context of industry, as opposed to the United States, where it was more like an art school, where people would go and they would develop their own kind of aesthetic and sense of working and form their own workshops. So in the midst of all this conversation about art and industry, Sam Maloof comes through with a resounding, thanks, but no thanks. I really like having a small workshop. I like having direct contact with my production. I like my clients. I like having this kind of small client. So I have to think that this is what Wharton Esherick is referring to when he says that he agrees with Sam Maloof's ideas. But it's kind of interesting, because what Sam Maloof is really describing is what we now know as studio furniture, which was the direction I think that Craft Council sponsored work actually went. But it's interesting to see it be kind of an underdog in the 1950s. So M is for Maloof, but it is also for music stand. So switching gears a little bit to this music stand, which was really, I think, one of Wharton Esherick's most iconic works of studio furniture. That's probably one of his best known pieces, but also emulated by these younger craftspeople. And I think that's one of the reasons that it has that kind of position in the design history books the way it does. So we've got on the left Wharton Esherick's music stand, designed 1951. And then in the middle, that's Wendell Castle's music rack, 1980. You can see kind of riffing on those organic forms and the idea that this music stand can be this kind of sculptural object. And then on the far right, we've got a music stand by Maloof in 1970. And I'm just going to flip the order, because I know that sometimes on the Zoom, the stuff on the right side gets cut off. So I've flipped it. So if yours was covered, now you can see the Maloof music stand here. So, the reverberations of Wharton Esherick decades after he designed his music stand. So Wharton Esherick's music stand has a story attached to it that I think is fairly well known. So, but I'll go into again. The original music stand Wharton Esherick designed for a dear friend of his, Rose Rubinson, who was an amateur cellist. So he created that for her in 1951. Rose and her husband, Nat, were constant patrons of Wharton Esherick. They commissioned over 50 original works from him. And at one point, Nat suggested to Wharton, hey, this music stand has gotten really favorable reception. Why don't you make some copies of it and sell them, because you can always use the money. And so Wharton started doing that. He made a few copies, but he found that the price he would have to charge was made it difficult to sell them. So he came up with a plan to get the price down. And here the story gets a little fuzzy. He supposedly went to some manufacturer in Philadelphia and had these parts made. It was not altogether satisfactory, and nevertheless, there were a number of music stands that he did deem okay, and those are the ones that are dated 1962, which are in museum and private collections around the country. But that's, kind of as to who actually made these music stands, it's been, pretty nebulous. But one of the really exciting finds in the new archives that we pulled out are the receipts that Wharton Esherick had for reproducing these music stands, that gives some clues to who made them and how it all went. So here we've got a letter from someone named Earl Schlossberg, whose letterhead says that he is a designer and consultant with an office at 211 North 2nd Street in Philadelphia. That's an old town. And there's an order in here for 50 music stands as per sample, completed in lots of 25 each. Supposed to be having a boiled linseed oil finish, which was a favorite of Wharton Esherick's, no surprise there. And then all pieces to be either solid cherry, or solid walnut, or vertical members in solid cherry with horizontal members solid walnut. So I guess some room for a little variation. And then $55 a finished piece. And then next to that, we have a note in Wharton Esherick's hand. He seems to be tabulating what's going on, maybe a little reminder of where he's at with this project. So January 15th, 1961, here, Earl Schlossberg took photo of music stand with chair and catalog of M of CC, and that M of CC is Museum of Contemporary Crafts, that exhibition that I showed the photograph of earlier. And then November 1961, Earl took music stand as model to make copies. And then February 1962, brought to finish, took back original for further authenticity of finish, promised to deliver in 6 weeks. And that promise doesn't seem to have been fulfilled because the date on the invoice for the actual music stands was a bit later. So here we have the actual manufacturer. It seems that Earl Schlossberg would have been a kind of an intermediary. So Seville furniture manufacturer, manufacturers and designers of fine, period, and contemporary furniture, sold to Mr. Esherick, 6862, 55 music stands, $62 for delivery, paid 6862. So some interesting threads to follow in terms of finding out who actually made the music stands and what the circumstances were. Kind of interesting, I think, to see the story of studio furniture, which becomes this really national level narrative coming back to a local story of furniture making in Philly. So that's what I have for today. Thank you for listening. I am going to unshare, stop sharing, and then open it up for discussion. Do we have any questions or comments? Anything in the chat?
Hi, I'm interested in the Danish connection between Wharton Esherick and Sam Maloof. What kind of Danish influences did they have?
Well, I know that both of them knew Tagfrid, who was a Danish furniture maker. But I think they would have been absolutely inundated with it at the Craft Council, because there was a lot of conversation around, again, those methods of training. And also, so the show that Wharton Esherick juried in 1957 was called Young Americans. And then the following year, they changed the topic to Young Americans and Young Scandinavians. So there was a lot of people looking at what the Scandinavians were doing. And I'm sure he must have taken some influences from, I mean, Wharton Esherick had a way of just taking in all manner of influences and kind of turning them, to his own uses. I think looking at his sources is like pulling a thread that just, unravels and unravels and unravels. Yeah.
Hi, I'm kind of interested in that last little piece that you were doing there, where Wharton ends up kind of outsourcing his music stand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, going back to what he was talking about with the council, where they were talking about like combining the studio craftsman with industry, and he likes what Maloof was saying about having a personal connection with his clients.
Mm-hmm.
Does him outsourcing, I know it was made by probably a smaller furniture maker in Philly, but him outsourcing his music stand, is that sort of counter to his beliefs? I know that he had other people making his furniture sometimes and things like that, but it seems a little counter to what he was interested in earlier. Did something change that made him want to do that?
I think it's absolutely counter to the way he had worked, and to those stated beliefs. Absolutely, right? I mean, and actually to even the way that we usually talk about studio furniture. I mean, the definition of studio furniture that I come up on again and again is that this is all done in one small workshop. And if that, the maker whose name is on it isn't actually making it with their own hands, that the idea that they are supervising it very, very closely. I might also note that this music stand endeavor didn't work very well. Nat Rubinson later said in an interview that he was sort of joking, but he said, it almost cost me my friendship with Wharton that I suggested he do this because it didn't go well. A lot of the music stands were not good. I mean, it seems to me from the receipts that Wharton bought them all, and it would make sense he'd want to bring all of his stuff back, but that it really, and then the other part of this that I didn't really have time to go into is that there's a letter that Wharton sends out to pretty much anyone he can think of who he thinks might want to buy the music stand. And it's the closest thing to a form letter that I have ever seen Wharton Esherick send out. I mean, the way he sold his three-legged stools was like 1Z, 2Z, 3Z, but this was like, I have come up with a new way of making the price low. It sounds very out of character. So yeah, it's an oddity for sure, and a question, why did he step out that way, and how did he feel about it?
Yeah, was he in need of money at the time, or was something?
For sure. But he was always in need of money, so right. I'm not sure what changed. Yeah, it's definitely a puzzle.
Yeah, well, thank you. This is very interesting.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions, thoughts? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I'll turn it back over to Larissa.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Holly. That was super informative and fun. I'm just going to mention a couple June events that we have coming up. So our next Spotlight Talk will be June 20th, and we will be talking with our first place prize winner for the juried exhibition this year called Telling Tales. And the artist is Lucia Garzon. So we'll be chatting with her on June 20th, and June 1st, the show actually opens. So we'll have the prize winners in our visitor center, and then the rest of the 25 that got juried in on our website. And on June 11th, we have a members reception for that exhibition. So if you're a member, sign up and come. It's free, and you can come hang out and see the pieces and chat with the artists. And if you're not a member, you can sign up to be that on our website and come to our fun June 11th event. And with that, I will send you guys a follow-up email that will include the recording and some resources related to what Holly talked about. And I'll send you into your afternoon, and hope everybody has a great day. So feel free to unmute and say goodbye, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.